Today, I'm going to introduce Inga Meadows. She is our extension associate. She works on herbaceous ornamental pathology. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to her.
Hi, Amanda. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Amanda, will you give me a thumbs up just to show me you can? Okay, we're good. Okay, so I need to share screen. 1 second here. Let's put in. Okay, so as Amanda mentioned, I'm Inga Meadows. I'm an associate plant pathologist, and I focus on vegetables and herbaceous ornamentals. I'm located at the Mountain Research Station in Waynesville, so that's way over in western North Carolina. Just to give you a little context of who I am and what my program is about, since I probably haven't met a lot of you. So as I mentioned, we do focus on vegetables, primarily tomatoes. So that's half of our program. We serve a lot of the commercial tomato growers. We help agents and other stakeholders in addressing those diseases. We also have a small project where we test truffle inoculated trees for colonization, and then the ornamental plant pathology side is the other half of my program, where we serve the greenhouse and nursery production and landscapers, and that's my.
Yeah, and I can't get my cursor won't move. I can't get. It's got me signed in there as visitor, but my cursor won't move.
Hit control and then hit your keyboard, your mouse.
Sorry about that, Inga. I went ahead and muted everybody else's microphone.
Okay,
Inga,
you
can
can
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I was muted and it took me a minute to find my unmute.
Okay.
Okay. Back on track. All right. So my title was trends in ornamental diseases. I'm not gonna try to predict what we're gonna see this year because I'll most certainly be wrong. But in 2017, I gave a similar talk. It was in person, but I had put together this slide just to say to see what diagnoses we are getting in the plant disease and insect clinic. And so the biggest triangle there is just my other group, that's 18%. But what I wanted to focus on was the next largest triangle is the water molds, which are the Phytophthora or Pythiums, which represented 14% of our samples. And again, these are just herbaceous ornamental samples. So that would include greenhouse annuals and herbaceous perennials. And then another 14% represented bacteria, which were primarily leaf spots, maybe a little bit of stem rot, but mostly bacterial leaf spots. And then fungal leaf spots was the next largest triangle. So I'm going to focus on the top three. And then, of course, we've got insufficient or no pathogen, and then virus, and so on and so forth. But if we look at 2020, we'll see some of the same patterns. So the no pathogen found is that biggest triangle, but the next biggest one at 18% are the water molds, which was similar in 2017. Again, this is the Pythiums and Phytophthora. And mostly what these samples were mostly Pythium from mums. The next biggest group was Fusarium, which jumped up from 2017 to be in the top three most diagnosed diseases. And these were mostly on mums and pinks. And then bacterial leaf spot was still up there. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. Are these top three categories, if you will, of problems that we see in the clinic. I will say it's quite variable from year to year, so I wouldn't read too much into these pie charts because it does shift around year to year. So I want to talk about prevention and management of water molds, bacterial leaf spots, and fusarium wilts and crowns in this talk. We'll get to some other general topics at the end as well. Feel free to speak up and ask a question in the middle of the presentation or wait till the end. Either way is fine with me. If you chat it, I'm not sure I will pick it up right away. Okay. So bacterial leaf spots and blights. So these are primarily caused, primarily caused by, at least what we see, primarily caused by 3 genera of bacteria. Xanthomonas, Pseudomonas, and Acidovorax. And you might have seen these if you've sent samples into the clinic. These names might have popped up there if you've gotten bacterial leaf spots. The host range is not very easy. It's pretty wide depending on which genus you have and which species of bacteria you have. So like I've listed some of the ones that we see Xanthomonas a lot on there. Similarly with Pseudomonas and Acidovorax. And each of these bacterial species can be host specific, meaning, you know, the Xanthomonas you find on geranium is probably not the same one that you find on ornamental kale. On the other hand, some have a very wide host range. And so I say this just to say, just to point out that in case you do have Xanthomonas, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to jump to all your other plant species. Regardless of which one it is, treatment is usually pretty similar, and I'll talk about treatment or management. Conditions that favor disease. For the Xanthomonas species, they tend to prefer really warm to hot environments. For the others, it can be variable. Pseudomonas tend to prefer a little bit cooler. Sorry, when I say warm, I mean, let's say above 80 or 85 degrees. The Pseudomonas sometimes a little cooler, but it depends on the species. What they all love is high humidity and any free water of any kind. So any water on the foliage. That really gets the bacteria moving around. Identification can be kind of hard. In general, they're usually small circular spots where the center might fall out. They could be water soaked, which I'll show you some pictures of what I call water soaking. And this symptom you would especially see on the underside of the leaf in the morning or just after watering when there's a lot of high humidity and free water. Sometimes it might start at the leaf margins. So in the picture on the right, you can see the bacteria has come in on those leaf margins and is extending inward into the leaf. Some of them you might have a yellow halo around, or it might be worse where in areas where water accumulates. You know, if your leaf is hanging down and water is accumulating at that leaf tip, that might be where you see the bacteria worse. You might be able to see bacterial streaming if you put some of this tissue in water. A lot of times you might need a stereoscope or a low-powered microscope. Agents may be more equipped to do this, or maybe bigger operations might have a microscope. I'm not sure. But that's one way to tell if you have a bacterial problem. But mostly I urge people to get a diagnosis confirmed in the PDIC because they're not necessarily easy to diagnose in the field unless you have experience with one of these pathogens, which I hope you don't. So I'm just going to show you some pictures of some common samples we've seen in the clinic. This is a Xanthomonas species on zinnia. So this is one that really prefers the warmer temperatures. This one's pretty bad, but in the bottom left circle, you'll see spots that have a yellow halo. That's what I meant by the halo. You see the brown spots with the yellow coloring around them. And then the water soaking, there's some images on the right in that circle on the lower right that have that dark brown but kind of wet look to them. And we'll see some more of these. Here's another picture of, this is Xanthomonas, a different species on geranium. Here you see the water soaking again on a number of these spots. Here, this is what I wanted to point out. I said that they're difficult to identify in the field. I'm not sure if you think these are fungal leaf spots or bacterial leaf spots, but either way, the one on the left is caused by a Pseudomonas on Gerbera daisy, and the one on the right is caused by Alternaria species. So the one on the left is caused by a bacterium, the one on the right is caused by a fungus. So it's pretty apparent in these pictures that you can't always tell. This is what I was talking about with bacterial streaming. If you have the equipment to do this, this is a piece of, this is an ornamental cabbage leaf that has black rot, which is caused by one of those Xanthomonas species. And you'll see, I've got it in water here and it's under a microscope, but you'll see where the arrows are pointing to, that's bacteria streaming out of that vein tissue. And so if you can observe that under the microscope, then you can confirm that you do have a bacterial problem and not a fungal leaf spot. So management really relies on strict sanitation. This is where our IPM strategies
Andrew,
are really needed.
no, I've got everything going except that.
Okay, can you hear me again? Okay.
Yeah, Inga, sorry about that.
It's okay. We'll roll with it. It's all the life of COVID, right?
That's right.
Jeepers. We'll roll with it. And okay. So, and what do I mean by strict sanitation? So sanitizing tools, using clean soil and pots, disposing of, getting rid of infected plants immediately, and any debris. And at least with the bacterial leaf spots, I recommend removing affected plants, but also adjacent plants, because likely that bacteria is already splashed onto those adjacent plants and you just aren't seeing symptoms yet. Avoiding overhead watering if possible. I know this isn't always possible, but if you have a history of one of these bacterial leaf spots, or you're growing one of these crops that you know can get bacterial leaf spots, then those crops, it'd be good to avoid that overhead watering. That will really reduce the chance of bacterial leaf spot starting. And then watering, if you are watering overhead, water when that foliage can dry. So watering in the morning versus in the evening when that foliage will stay wet all night. Heating, you can heat from underneath. That'll help dry the foliage. Some places are able to do that. Also, it's really important to avoid handling those plants when they're wet. Those plants are wet and you're touching the plants when they've got the bacteria, it'll spread to pretty much every single plant. As far as what to spray, we've got copper and streptomycin sprays, but resistance can be present and they're only preventative. There's nothing we have that you can spray after the fact that will serve as a sort of curative. Once those lesions are going, it's really hard to stop them. So if you have a history of these diseases, copper or strep are a good approach. I am pretty sure that if you do have a problem and you send it into the clinic, I think Mike has instituted a way to, our diagnostician, Mike Munster, I think he is screening the strains that come in for copper or strep sensitivity. Once they're, and yeah, as I mentioned, once plants are infected, chemical control is ineffective. So IPM is really important here. Regardless, I've listed some products here. I didn't put efficacy because, oh, I did put efficacy, excuse me. My pictures are over top of my chart here. So I've listed a number of products. Again, they're preventative only. I've got an R next to the ones where we've seen resistance occur. And I've got frat code in there. Notice none of them are rated as good because we do seriously lack good products for managing these bacteria. And again, that's why we really stress sanitation. I'll move on to fusarium wilts and crown rots now. So you may have heard of fusarium wilt or versus fusarium crown rot, and they are actually two different diseases. Fusarium wilt affects the vascular tissue, and this is when you would see the whole plant wilt, hence the name wilt. But and you might also see discolored streaks when you slice open the stem part. And so I've got a picture down here. This is actually a tomato stem, but a similar picture would occur with almost any other plant that gets a fusarium wilt. You would likely see some discoloration there. Versus the crown rot, this is a fusarium that's actually attacking the crown, and you would not see these streaks. So regardless, they're different species of fusarium depending on the host. So again, some have a wider host range than others, but in general, it wouldn't necessarily, one fusarium wilt on a given crop wouldn't necessarily affect another crop. What we commonly see fusarium wilt on are hostas and mums, osteospermum, pinks, and liriope. Anything? Another interesting symptom is you might see a dry rot in the crown. It'd be dry as opposed to sort of a wet, mushy rot. But again, not always easy to diagnose, so I do recommend the clinic. But here's some pictures. So these are pictures again from the PDIC. This is on dianthus. Notice the yellowing. And this, again, you might not, unless you've experienced this disease before, you might not know what was causing the problem. You might think a Phytophthora, you might think other crown and root rot pathogens. This is a common symptom on liriope. And one thing you'll notice if you've seen this on liriope, if you dig down towards the crown, you might see where the actual tuber, not the tuber, I forget what that propagation material is, but you'll see it's routing from the soil up into the leaf tissue there. This is hosta, another fusarium wilt on hosta, and this is a picture of that dry rot that I was referring to earlier. It's a very, just dry to the touch. I've got some spores on the left-hand side. Not that you would actually see those. You'd have to use a microscope to be able to see them, but they're very distinct. If there are agents on this call that have a microscope, you might be able to see these, but they're very distinct-looking spores. But management is somewhat difficult. These can spread by water. These spores can spread by water splash, infested soil, and plant material. So they can hang out in plant debris and soil, on the ground or on surfaces or in pots. Their survival structures, which we call chlamydospores, can survive for a long time. So they'll survive in soil and again plant debris. And fungicides, sometimes in general, it's difficult to get them into the soil and the roots before disease occurs. And oftentimes with these fusarium, you won't see the disease until later in the season. And by that time, the plant's, covering the pot. So it's even more difficult to get those in there, to get the fungicide into the soil where it's needed. some management tactics if you have this disease or you have had it in the past or you do suspect you have it. But inspecting plant material, and this goes for any disease, it's a really good idea to inspect that plant material when it comes in. And if it's poor quality, get rid of it. Disposing affected plants and again adjacent plants, likely that fungus has already spread to plants that are adjacent to the affected ones. And it's really important to get rid of those immediately because the longer they hang out, the more those spores are going to splash to healthy plants. Disposal should be far away from the production area, and this includes from where your media is. Um, yeah, just get it away from any production area. Avoid reusing pots. I know it's tempting, but if you can use new pots, that's the cleanest way to go. If you do have to reuse, I always suggest rinsing thoroughly, meaning to get rid of that any organic debris. You want to get rid of that leaf debris and soil before sanitizing because what happens is the sanitizer can be inactivated by organic material. Also, it's hard for sanitizers to penetrate soil. So if there's chunks of soil in there or potting media, that sanitizer won't get in there. It'll only touch the surface. And scouting frequently. If you do have a history of disease, you can use some of those fungicides. I think they're on the next slide. Preventatively, again, they're best used before disease occurs. Most effective. I've listed a few here with the FRAC code and some efficacy there. I will say it's really important to rotate those FRAC codes to avoid getting any fungicide resistance to develop. Generally, we haven't seen fungicide resistance in this pathogen, but regardless, it is important, and it's on the label. Probably applying as a drench is the best, or as a directed spray early in the plant production. I'll move on to Phytophthora and Pythiums. So I'm covering these together, even though there's quite a number of different Phytophthora and Pythiums, but a lot of times the management is very similar. Sorry, these are the water molds I was referring to earlier. And we call them water molds because they really prefer that wet or poorly drained areas and puddles. So any standing water or overwatering really promotes Phytophthora and Pythiums. A large host range within these two genera. So I've listed a number of crops there that we generally see Phytophthora or Pythium on. Again, we're talking about multiple species of the pathogens as well. So again, some species are host specific, others are not. So that's where we go back to. It's important to know what your problem is, and then we can help you figure out how to manage that. They also form survival structures that allow them to survive for a long time in soil and crop debris. They really easily spread by water. They produce a swimming spore that spreads through water. They can survive in infested soil, so any infested soil movement and equipment can spread the disease, and infected plants. A lot of times you can see where I think where you'll see a facility has had a Phytophthora problem. They've been able to put a systemic fungicide on it and stop that Phytophthora from progressing, sell the plants, only to find that the Phytophthora kicks in again once that fungicide has worn off. And so it can be tricky to tell whether you have an infected plant just by scouting if a systemic fungicide has been put on there. But these all make it difficult to manage these diseases. For Phytophthora, sorry, I'm skipping ahead. Identification in the field, there's a variety of symptoms. Because we deal with so many different crops, the symptoms can vary from crop to crop and from Pythium to Phytophthora. Generally, you're going to see a root rot, color rot, or maybe even an aerial blight. There's some Phytophtheras that will cause an aerial blight, like Phytophthora nicotiana causes an aerial blight on annual vinca. And these can be mistaken for other diseases. So you might also see wilting. Water-soaked lesions may occur on the stem or on the crown. A lot of times, if you suspect you have Phytophthora or Pythium and you pull up the plant out of the pot, if you don't see many roots, it's a good suspicion that you might have a Phytophthora or Pythium. Or the roots are discolored. Maybe they're brown or sloughing off. Stunting is another common symptom you might see with Pythium. The Phytophthora tend to be more aggressive than the Pythiums, but here I'm generalizing, so it depends, but that's a generalization there. Pythium can also be a damping off pathogen, and what I mean by that is a lot of times when if Pythium is present when seeds are germinating and becoming seedlings, a lot of times we'll see the Pythium or other damping off pathogens cause that plant to just fall over. And really what it's done is attacked the stem or crown right at that soil line and caused the plant to fall off. So those are the damping off pathogens. They only affect plants when they're seedlings. Here I put an asterisk next to disease pattern because you might see disease worse in wet areas or depressions, and that is also a good clue. You're probably dealing with a water mold. Agdia makes these test kits, and I've got a image of them on the right hand side there. That's a picture from the University of California. But if you suspect a Phytophthora, and some agents or maybe even some facilities have these Agdia test strips, you can crush up your sample in a little buffer bag and then stick one of these test strips in the sample, and in 5 minutes or less, you'll have either one stripe, which indicates a negative sample, meaning no Phytophthora, or you'll get a positive, which is two stripes, which indicates that you have Phytophthora present. The clinic uses these a lot to sort of triage which way to go on some of these samples. So you might see in your diagnostic report from Mike where he's used an Agdia test kit. And the clinic will also confirm. But these are really great tools. The only issue is that they can be kind of expensive. They're, I think, $3 to $5 per strip. So I'll just show some pictures here. Here's annual vinca. You can see wilting. There's stem necrosis on the upper left there. This is on Spathiphyllum. So here you'll notice the roots. Some of the roots are white, but you'll notice some of them are browning and probably not as many roots as there should be. And then the Phytophthora is moving up the stem into the leaves there. And this is on daylily. So the upper portion of the plants are looking pretty unthrifty, yellowing and thin, and the roots are pretty discolored there. And this is Calibrachoa. Notice the lack of roots on the bottom in the potting media there. And this is a good picture of Pythium attacking Petunia. You'll notice the healthy plant on the left and the unhealthy plant on the right, or the Pythium affected plant on the right. This is basil, so I know it's not an ornamental, but another pattern here of Pythium. Oops, hold on. There we go. Management, again, you'll hear me say this over and over, but sanitation, using clean pots and media and equipment, benches, etc., especially the transplant production area. If you do reuse pots, again, rinse them and sanitize them. Avoiding overwatering and poor drainage. This will really help limit how much Pythium or Phytophthora you have if you've got a history of these diseases. Roguing affected plants immediately and getting them away from the production area. It's really good to keep plants off the floor if you can, even high enough to avoid splash. So, one of the things that concerns me when I visit some of these facilities is when the plants are on the ground or it may be concrete, maybe gravel, but they're sitting right on the ground. We're all walking around with shoes that came from outside. So we're bringing in whatever Pythium, Phytophthora, and other pathogens that are outside. We're bringing them in, and then those plants are sitting right on that, are exposed. The soil is exposed to whatever pathogens we're bringing in on our shoes. So getting them off the floor is great, and will help reduce disease. Finding the source. It might be that if your media is touching raw soil, or if the area where you're storing your potting media is somehow exposed to outdoor soil, either you're bringing equipment into that media storage area and that equipment has mud on it, you may be bringing in these pathogens from outside and already starting with infested media. So it's good to take a hard look at where you're storing your media. Maybe it's reusing pots. Maybe it's coming in from the germplasm. A lot of places want to blame the germplasm or the propagation material, which I won't rule out. But it's also very important to take a hard look at your own practices before you start blaming any propagation material coming in. And then I always put fungicides last, because if you don't do the above, the fungicides are only going to get you so far. So use them early if as a preventative. Regardless, there are some systemic ones, but I don't like to rely on systemic activity. But I've listed a number of them here. We do have resistance to mefenoxam in some of these pathogens, and some Pythium species are not sensitive to Segovis, and that's a new. Sorry, I don't. In the list, it's Segovis. It's the fourth one down. Oxythiopypyrin is the active ingredient. So we do have a lot of good products, fair to good products, but again, you'll get the most efficacy if you use them early and use those other IPM strategies first. Here's a picture of what I was trying to say earlier. Here's the potting media in the back, and then right up here is raw soil in the foreground. And what this place is doing is using a tractor that goes inside their production area, but also goes outside. And so they're scooping this soil up, but mixing it with raw outside soil at the same time. So who knows what could be coming in on that potting media. So rearranging where your potting media is stored may go a long ways in preventing some of these problems. Just to show you some pictures, this is actually not Phytophthora, but this is another disease called southern blight on dianthus. But the point is that it's been growing on a concrete floor, which they do clean and sanitize between crops, but you'll notice there's plenty of debris on the floor here, and even our shoes. Who knows what was on our shoes when we came in there. This is one of those diseases that we probably shouldn't have on ornamentals, that definitely came in from outside and didn't come in from the crop. I'm going to move into some other resources. Hopefully we're okay on time. Yeah. Hopefully everybody knows about this. But just in case you don't, there's a Southeastern U.S. Pest Control Guide for nursery crops and landscape plantings. And it's getting I guess, rather old now, 2017, but it has good information on there. It's online, and it's not just fungicides and disease control. There's um, herbicides and insecticides listed in there as well, and I think PGRs are listed in there. Um, but that is a good resource. We also have the North Carolina Ag Chem Manual that is updated annually. This one, obviously, the picture I have in here is from 2017, but the 2021 version is coming out soon. It's you can access it online for free, but it is $35 to purchase. But this one's more up to date than the previous one I just showed you. The plant pathology extension portal. So we've been trying to update more disease fact sheets and recommendations, and I've listed a few of them that we've updated here. We are working on others, so we're trying to update a lot of this information, put some more information out there, and also more images, so you have a good idea of maybe it can help you identify what you have. Another good resource and resource for you is IR4. I don't know if you know about the IR4 project. It's a USDA run project that their whole goal is to get products, fungicides, herbicides, insecticides listed for minor use crops, and that includes ornamentals. Because a lot of times the pesticide companies don't want to invest in getting these products registered for crops that are not field crops. It's just not lucrative for them. So that's where IR4 steps in. And they've been doing this for decades, probably 30 plus or minus years. But what they do have on their webpage, this might even be an old picture, but they have crop safety and research, efficacy studies on a number of different pathogens. So here you see all is listed, but you could click on entomology, pathology, and weed science and see some of their most recent research on different products that are either already registered or going to be registered. I talked about sanitizers, and people always ask about sanitizers. This, and I don't think they've changed a whole lot recently, but this is one of the PDFs that we have on the NC State website, and I think Mike sends it out if he talks about sanitizing in your disease clinic recommendation, he'll probably include a link to this page. I'm not going to walk you through it, but it's got different materials listed on the left. Some of the trade names on that next column, the formulation, different remarks. So it'll tell you, any key pieces of information you might want to know about, and contact time, what it takes, how long it takes to disinfect or sanitize using that sanitizer. So I've mentioned it plenty of times. The Plant Disease and Insect Clinic is a very good resource. The NC Department of Ag has soil and tissue testing. So if you do need help with knowing what's in your potting media, the NCDA is a good place to go. I think a lot of agents and or NCDA agronomists can help with this. So reach out to them, use those resources. They'll also test for nematodes if you suspect you have nematodes, which I didn't talk about in this presentation. Pest alerts and pest news. Mike Munster, the diagnostician, and myself, and or if any of the area agents see something that we want to alert others about, look for those pest alerts and pest news. If you want to sign up to get those pest alerts, you can just Google NCSU pest alerts, and then some of them may come up. If you click on one of the pest alerts on the bottom right, you will see an area to put your email in. And I promise they don't go crazy. I've signed up for them, and it won't clog your email box, but you'll get some good information through there. The sanitizers are also listed in the Ag Chem manual. Yeah, and I've just put some websites down there. If we have, yeah, it looks like we still have time. So I wanted to touch on FRAC codes in case you don't know what I'm talking about when I say FRAC. FRAC stands for Fungicide Resistance Action Committee. It's basically this committee. They have the same type of committee for herbicides and insecticides, but it's basically they were established to manage and prevent fungicide resistance. That's the whole key. And so every active ingredient has a FRAC code based on its activity. So even though you may have two different active ingredient names, they may have the same FRAC code. So just be careful to watch for that. And the FRAC codes are listed on the fungicide labels. This table, FRAC comes up with a table that's updated annually because we get, as new products come in, we have to figure out what activity they have. And we don't know when a new product comes out, we may not know what that activity is for a while. So those are always updated, especially as fungicide resistance develops also. And then there's established protocols for fungicide resistance management, which is built into every fungicide label. If you want to check out FRAC, you can. I have their website up at the top left, frac.info. But if you look at their information, they tell you about resistance risk. So some pathogens are more likely to develop resistance to a given fungicide than others. And not all fungicides are prone to inducing resistance in a pathogen. So it's an interesting website if you want more information. I've got a snapshot of it right here of what it looks like. I know there's a lot of information on here, but probably the most important things that you would be interested in are on the far right is the FRAC code. So if you look at that first one, FRAC code 1, you'll see in the comments section, resistance common in many fungal species. Let's see, high risk of developing fungicide resistance, whereas others like 22 is low to medium risk. So just an example there. And here's obviously a picture of one of our fungicides, and there's the FRAC code at the top. They call it group, and you'll see group or FRAC listed. Just know that that number designates which active ingredient or activity that fungicide has. I think I've said some of these already. Sometimes you might see the FRAC code starting with a letter. If it starts with M, that means it has multiple modes of action, and those are generally less likely to develop resistance. If it's got a U, then we don't know the mode of action yet. If it has a P, it probably means it's got a host plant defense induction, where it's inducing the plant to respond sort of like an immune system, as opposed to acting directly on the pathogen. I have a list of some newer fungicides and biologicals. So the chemicals chemical or synthetic products I've listed on the left there, and the biologicals are listed on the right. So just some of the new ones that are out there. Aston is listed for botrytis control, Mural. Some of these are not quite so new, but I just wanted to include them in case you hadn't heard of them. They might be within the last few years. And the biologicals on the left, on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm not going to go into much detail there. I just wanted to put those up there for a second. I do have a project I'm working on, and I wanted to get your input and or see if you are interested in participating. Some of the things I'm doing, I'm looking at one, best practices for soil-borne disease management. I've seen that at least through the clinic that there's a number of facilities that might have problems with soil-borne diseases. And it's an area that I feel like I need to address more in the greenhouse industry in North Carolina. So what I'd like to do is survey maybe 20-ish greenhouses across North Carolina, identify where our gaps are in knowledge, but also do a in-person walkthrough with the greenhouse manager or the growers to also demonstrate in person areas of improvement. Because a talk like this, I can say, clean up your facility, put your media in a clean spot, on and on. But what I think really helps is if I can demonstrate in person in your facility where you could make changes that you would see an improvement in your diseases. At the same time, I'd also like to see survey for Phytophthora species, sample plants that have Phytophthora, and probably what we'll end up doing is testing them for different fungicide sensitivities. So I'd like to know if you do have Phytophthora problems, and we can come out and sample and also do our survey from the first bullet point. If there are facilities that are having a lot of Phytophthora problems, I'd like to identify those and do a more intensive sampling where we sample media, water, and other locations throughout the facility to see if we can identify where that Phytophthora is coming from. I can explain in more detail. I wanted to just give you a snapshot of what I'm doing. So if you're interested in participating, I'd like to do it this spring, which I know is a really busy time, but we can do it throughout the year and even next year. So you can contact me, or I'm working with the area agents, Stacy Jones, Amanda Taylor, or Danny Lauderdale. You can contact them as well, and they can reach out to me. So with that, I will thank you and take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Inga. We have one question in the chat box. How far away is far enough for disposal of infected plants?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I don't think there's a distance per se. If you're talking about within the facility, if you have trash cans within the facility, that's somewhat okay, but it's best to put them outside of the facility in a dumpster or something. So where they're not sharing the same air, let's say. Hopefully that answers the question. Maybe, yeah. Ask again if that's not specific enough.
Okay, do we have any more questions? You can either tap or type into the chat box or unmute your mic. All right, here's a question from Kurt. What is a preventative spray schedule? Once per week, copper or streptomycin?
Preventative sort of depends on the disease and the product, but once a week, say every 5 to 10 days, depending on the label and depending on the pathogen, is probably a preventative schedule. I'm not sure what you mean by copper or streptomycin. I would say you could do either of those, but for Xanthomonas. Yeah, I would be careful with spraying. So Xanthomonas can develop resistance to both copper and streptomycin. So probably alternating them would be good. But you'd probably have to do a once a week type spray. Yeah.
All right, any more questions for Inga? All right. I don't see any more questions, so I think we're good to sign off. Make sure that you've registered on that Google link and have provided your license number if you're here for pesticide credits. And be on the lookout for an email with the recordings of these 3 sessions that we've done. And thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.